Way your face. Feel better. Why don't you say so? They watching my moves, yeah, do my dance. I'm a skinny little bitch, still shaking ass. And ain't shit free, niggas show me cash. Fuck a broke boy, I been had a bag. I come in first place, I never been last. A bitch act stupid, bitch get trashed.
Hi, I was almost murdered a couple times, but this is the coolest one. So I'm Arab, and me and my husband visited the homeland a couple years ago. We ended up in Oman. We're out in the middle of the desert staying at this motel. There's no Wi-Fi, no cell service, no taxis, Uber, anything like that. We're the only people staying in the motel besides the owner. And we book a little sunrise excursion. You go have a picnic in the desert. So we wake up at 3 a.m. We're told other people are going to be on this excursion, and we get to the van and there's no one else. We think whatever, it's just me, my husband, and the driver and his assistant. So we're driving in the dark for a while. We look in the trunk and there's a spade shovel and a cooler. So I go to the driver, hey, yo, what's that shovel doing back there? And his response was, oh, we're going to be out there for a while. That was the response I got. And so I'm like, okay, what's the cooler? And he says, oh, there's a bunch of drinks and snacks in there for the picnic. So I reach around and I open the cooler and it's empty, except for ice. So obviously we start to panic and I can't fit anymore. So let me know if you want more. Hi, I was almost murdered a couple times. This is part 2. Go watch part 1 if you haven't seen it. Okay, so we just saw that the cooler was empty. There's only ice in it. My husband and I start texting back and forth about our situation. We are very scared. My husband actually texts me and says, if we can't get out of this, I'll attack them. You run and get out of here. We thought we were on our way to die. So in a last ditch effort, I come up with a scheme. I asked the driver, how far is the nearest convenience store? Because I have a problem back here. And he's like, oh, it's like 15 minutes away, but we'll miss the sunrise, so we're not going. Now, this guy knows that I have severe Crohn's disease because I told them about my food allergies. I start crying. I say my Crohn's disease is acting up. I'm in a lot of pain and I think I'm going to throw up. We need to go to a convenience store. We argue back and forth, and then I mention that I threw up blood that morning. Now, as soon as I mentioned that I threw up blood, things changed and he agreed to change course and go to this convenience store. So now we're sitting in this car for like 15-20 minutes wondering if they're actually going to take us to this store. I'm uploading part 3 as soon as I'm done editing, I promise. I was almost murdered a couple times, but this is the coolest one. This is part 3, so if you haven't seen the other parts, go watch them. So we wait an excruciating 20 minutes and we do get to the convenience store. For some reason, the driver and his assistant come into the store with us. I immediately go to the shopkeeper and I ask for the Wi-Fi information, and he gives it to me. So I make a FaceTime audio call to my sister who's in America, and she doesn't answer because of the time zone difference. However, I pretend that she does answer. Once again, in front of the motel owner, I explain the situation, what's going on with my Crohn's disease. I tell her exactly where I am, what the convenience store is called, what the motel is called, and who I am with. I pretend that she answers me, and I'm like, yeah, that is a good idea. I'll tell them that we can't go to do the sunrise and we'll just go back to the motel. I pretend to promise her that I'll call her in an hour to tell her that I'm safe. And then I get off of my fake phone call. The motel owner hears everything that happens, and him and his assistant look pissed. I'm uploading one more part as soon as I edit. I was almost murdered a couple times. This is part 4, so go watch the others if you haven't seen them. So I get off my fake phone call and I talk to the motel owner. I tell him, listen, I spoke to my sister about what's going on, and she and I both think that I shouldn't go on the picnic. I should go back to the motel and I should rest. And he tries to argue with me, and he says, you already paid for it and we can't refund you, so we should really go. Me and my husband were like, dude, we don't care about the money. Just take us back to the motel. We start kind of making a scene, so they agree to take us back. We get in the van. It's like an hour-and-a-half drive. We are able to tell that we're going in the right direction though, so we're coming down a little bit. Now we get back to the motel. However, remember that me and my husband are the only tenants in the motel that night. We get back to our room, we lock the door. My husband starts crying immediately. He thinks that they're gonna come in the night and try to kill us. We take every piece of furniture in the room and put it in front of the door. We also sleep with anything in the room that could be used as a weapon. We had a driver scheduled for the following afternoon to come pick us up and take us to the airport. So we made it through the night and we lived.
Part 2, how I was almost abducted and caught by a serial killer. A few years after this incident, I was at work, bored out of my mind, and decided to download an app. This app had a ton of paranormal, cryptid, serial killer, and UFO articles. As I was browsing through the serial killer articles, I came across one that made my heart drop into my ass. Israel Keyes. He was widely known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her body, and dumping the pieces into a frozen lake. He would travel across the U.S. burying kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. After he murdered Samantha Koenig in Alaska, he traveled to Texas for a wedding in a city not too far from where I live and disappeared for a bit. Not even his own family knew where he was. He was arrested in Lufkin and brought to a city 1 over from me before he was extradited back to Alaska to stand trial. A year ago, I found a book on him and read about his crimes. At the end of the book, he described some of his favorite places to abduct people were public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if there's a kill kit buried in the woods of the cemetery that he tried to abduct me in. You were fast, Israel, but I think that my grandfather was watching out for me that day because I was faster. Story time of how I was almost abducted and caught by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I decided to visit my grandfather's grave because it was his birthday. His passing was really hard for me to deal with because he had just died the previous year in March and the wounds were still pretty fresh. It was daytime and I was kneeling in front of his grave with my head down. I was mourning and crying as I thought of our memories together. However, something didn't feel right. For some reason, a sense of urgency filled my stomach. I could somehow tell something bad was about to happen, but I didn't know what. The area around the cemetery was covered in woods. In that moment, I looked up to see a man full-on sprinting from the woods in my direction. Although I was in shock, I forced myself to get up and run as fast as possible towards my truck. By the time I made it to my truck, he had gotten about 50 feet from me. I jumped in and locked the doors instantly. That's when he stopped and threw his hands up in the air in a huff like his favorite team had just lost a football game. I started my truck and slammed my foot on the gas pedal, driving right past him. Our eyes were locked and neither of us broke eye contact for a second. I got a really good look at his face. At first, I thought I was your average weirdo, but little did I know I was looking into the face of one of the most notorious serial killers.
Story time about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So a little background information. This had all started as soon as my dad left my mom and I. I was like 13 around the time. Well, ever since then, my mom would have different guys in and out of the house all the time. Like, we were lucky if a month went by and she was still with the same dude. Which, I mean, I kind of get it because my dad did leave us for a woman that he had started another family with. But at the same time, it was just a whole mess. Anyway, so she had got with this new guy and we're gonna call him Tyler. And by the way, the dudes that she would date, they would literally live at our house. Anyway, so a week after he moved in, I started getting really close to him, which usually never happens. Usually I would try to keep my distance because I knew how wrong it was of her having all these different guys in the house when I'm only 16. Anyways, every time that my mom would go to work, he would invite me to go see a movie and he would just be really flirty with me. And he was only 6 years older than me. And my mom was 32. You do the math. Anyways, like for part 2. Part 2 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, the guy was being super flirty with me, inviting me to the movies when my mom wasn't home and all that stuff. Well, then it led to more than just that. By the way, this guy did not have a job, so he was home with me 24/7. And I was doing online school. So we were in the house by ourselves, 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Anyways, like I said, it led to more and we started doing the nasty and stuff. Ew, just, yeah. Well, the one day after we got done doing the nasty in my mom's room, we had fell asleep. And yes, we did not have clothes on. Well, at 2 in the morning, I hear someone pounding on the bedroom door. And my mom worked night shifts. So we get up, he hurries up and gets dressed and tells me to hide under the bed. And he opens the door and it's my mom's sister. My sister literally lived in the apartment next door. And she was like, oh yeah, neither of you were answering the phone. So she wanted me to check on you guys. Like, where's Elena? And I'm still under the bed naked, like for part 3. Part 3 about why my mom kicked me out when I was 16. So like I said, I'm laying under the bed, no clothes on. She asks where I am. And he's like, oh, she should be in her room. So he goes looking for me everywhere with her. And he's like, oh, well, maybe she's outside on the patio. And I don't know why the hell my mom's sister had a key to our apartment anyways. But she's still looking for me in the apartment and she looks under the fucking bed. And at first she's like, oh my god, what did he do to you? And I'm trying to tell her nothing, like I made that decision on my own. So she calls my mom right away. My mom comes home. She's screaming at me and she kicks me out. So I go to my grandma's house and I told my grandma what happened. And my grandma calls her and she's like, it's not her fault that you gave her daddy issues. And I'm like, bruh, what the fuck? Child, anyways. So then she goes on Facebook and starts posting about how I'm a whore and a slut and how, like, it isn't her boyfriend's fault at all. So now I live...
So she's raising her voice at me and I'm like, but I just couldn't, y'all. So I was like, I can raise my voice too. Do you want to play this game? Because I'll win, promise. And she's like, oh, well, what time do you get off work? And I'm like, I'm closing. I'm actually getting off at 11. Would you like to pick me up? And then she calls me stupid. She's like, you're fucking stupid. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna eat that. Then she calls me a dumb bitch. Whew. So I took a deep breath and I said, fuck you, you dumbass bitch. Your broke ass can't even afford these motherfucking clothes and you over here trying to scam me. Fuck off my line. And honestly, me and her just started going back and forth at each other like, My manager's like, go to the back, go to the back, go to the back. I'm still cursing her out as I'm walking to the back of the store. I really thought I would get fired, but I actually didn't. One time I was behind the register at Victoria's Secret. This customer walks in and immediately everybody spots her as a red flag. She's just picking up items, throwing them in her bag, not looking at sizes, not looking at colors. So everybody's like, Everyone's on their walkie like, watch this customer. She's coming to the fitting room. She's headed to the cash drop. Somebody get her. Check her ID. Get her. Get her. She has a bag full of stuff. And guess who gets her at the register? Me. So she comes to my register and she dumps out her stuff and we're having a regular conversation. Hi, how are you? Yada, yada, yada. Her total comes up to probably between $700 to $900. It was expensive. My manager is at the register next to me talking to me on the walkie. Ashley, make sure you get that ID. Don't matter what she's using, make sure you get that ID. So I ask her for the ID because she's paying credit. Why do you need to ask for my ID? Just take it, run it. I'm like, no ma'am, I'm sorry, I need your ID for the purchase. She starts to raise her voice at me.
Story time of how I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me with my cousin. My boyfriend and I had been together for 2.5 years. His family loved me and my family loved him and they expected us to get married. Well, last year when COVID started, we were actually in different countries, so we didn't see each other for 3 months. During those 3 months, we FaceTimed 4 times a day, and we were always texting. He happened to be quarantining in our hometown, so both of our families were in the same place. I was quarantined in a different country. One day my cousin calls me and tells me that she met a really nice guy on a dating website. I was so happy for her because she had had bad luck with guys. Every single week, her and I would catch up on the phone and she would tell me how much she liked this guy, and how amazing their dates were, and how amazing he was in bed, how sweet and considerate he was. I couldn't be happier for her. Well, when I finally get back home, my boyfriend is super distant and cold. So naturally, I called my cousin and complained. She told me to give him space. She said I should just leave him alone. And so like an idiot, I did leave him alone. One day my cousin calls me and tells me to come over for dinner. When I got there, my boyfriend's car was parked in her garage. I thought it was just her nice way of trying to get us to talk. I walk in and catch them doing the dirty on the couch, come back for part 2. So I walk in on my cousin and my boyfriend doing the dirty on her couch. They quickly get up from the couch and get dressed. Of course, by that time, I'm in hysterics. I'm crying and yelling. My boyfriend instantly got on his knees and begged me for forgiveness. I went up to my cousin and I punched her right in the face. She wasn't expecting that. And I said, well, this is the guy that you've been dating, isn't it? She said yes, and that she was just trying to find the best way to tell me. And so she just thought the best way to tell me was to get me to walk in on her and him doing the dirty. I punched her again. My boyfriend came to her rescue though. Instantly went into hero mode, which made me even angrier, so I punched him too. I stormed out of her house and went back to my house. Well, I told my parents everything. And my dad went over to my uncle's house, my cousin's dad, and he told him everything. She was about to turn 19, so he took away her phone and her car. And I get a phone call from my ex, come back for part 3. So my lying, cheating ex calls me and explains to me why he actually slept with my cousin. He said that he was so lonely and that he didn't know what to do, and that the closest thing to me he could find was my cousin. Right, as if that was any comfort to me. He said I should be grateful that I didn't cheat with someone else. I told him he had totally betrayed my trust and that I could never ever trust him again. And then he confessed that she was pregnant and that his parents wanted them to get married. He said he just wanted to give me a heads up. Then he said that we could still be together but just not tell anyone, so basically he wanted me to be his side piece. I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of his mouth. It was like I didn't know this man. Guess what I did? I recorded the entire conversation. So I went straight to my cousin and I let her listen to it. She was so shocked. She couldn't believe that he would offer to have me as a side chick. Well, I also let my uncle listen to it. He went to my ex's house and beat him up. Honestly, that made me sad, but he deserved it. They now have a baby and he's gained 50 pounds. Trust your instincts, girl, and always record your conversations. Also, how cute are my nails?
Put a finger down if from as soon as you were born, your parents would force you to watch porn, specifically a man and a woman. That way, as you grew up, you would think that relationships were supposed to be between men and women. And so every time you saw a couple of the same gender, you would automatically assume that they weren't normal and had some type of mental illness. And so when you grew up and sooner or later made a friend who you got really close with and eventually became best friends with, and she came out to you and told you she was gay, you ended up dropping her And not only that, but made a fake page and outed her, so then the whole school knew, but she still doesn't know that it was you. And so one day when your parents who gave you that mindset died in a car crash, that friend you outed and completely violated offered to let you stay with them, and her parents would take custody of you even though you weren't as close as you used to be, and you took up on that offer and started living with her, but she still doesn't know that it was you who outed her until one day you felt too bad, so you decided to tell her. I'm running out of time, so like for part 2.
Put a finger down, part 2. If when you finally told your friend that it was you who made that fake page and told the whole school that she was gay, she didn't get mad at you, but instead forgave you and said there's no reason to be mad since it happened in the past, and then she educated you and gave you a different perspective once you told her your parents made you watch porn that was strictly a man and a woman together, and after living with her and her family for a while, you realized that your parents had completely brainwashed you, and you felt sick to your stomach about how your mindset has been your entire life, and so you were kind of glad that your parents were dead.
Story time about how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. So me and my husband were high school sweethearts. He was very kind, very in tune about my feelings, and we were like best friends. We never really did anything sexual because he didn't want our relationship to be like that. We were together for 6 years, waited until marriage to lose our virginity to one another. The year before getting married, I noticed he would stare at guys a lot, but I would never really think anything about it because at least he was not looking at girls. Fast forward, we get married, and 2 years later, I get pregnant, and we were both excited. When I get to the doctors, I get my yearly test done for STDs, of course, but as always, I'm clean. Maybe 1 or 2 weeks later, I get a call from the doctor saying I tested positive for HIV. Let me know if you guys want a part 2. Part 2 of how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. Like I said earlier, 2 weeks later, I get a call from the doctor saying I tested positive for HIV. I was shaking and crying, and I was so shocked. And the only thing I ever heard about HIV at the time was that I only had a couple months to live. I couldn't believe the only man that I've ever been with gave me this disease. I thought I was doing everything right, the right way, and still ended up being in a hole. I was so nervous to confront my husband because I didn't think it was like him to cheat on me, and I thought maybe he thought I was cheating. So the next day I pretended everything was fine. I lied to him and told him that my phone died and that I needed his to call my mother. He gave me his phone. I went into the bathroom and immediately I start snooping. As I'm going through his phone, I didn't see any texts from girls, so I'm like, maybe the doctor got the wrong test. I'm running out of time. Come back for part 3. Part 3 of how I found out my husband gave me HIV while I was pregnant. So, like I said, I went to his phone and I didn't see any texts from other girls. So, I'm thinking maybe the doctor called the wrong person. Anyways, I gave up on looking through his phone and I just talked to him. I sat him down and told him that I had HIV and that I haven't cheated on him ever. He looked at me and cried. He broke down in tears and apologized. I got so upset with him because I realized that he did cheat on me, and I was really upset for our unborn child. So I took all of his clothes, I took his things, and I threw them all out. Right before I kicked him out, I yelled at him saying, "Who was the girl that gave it to you?" And he told me it wasn't a girl. It was his friend David.